I grew up in an old rural house built in the 1700s. At one point, it had been an inn. It was passed down through several generations of a family who made up much of the population in the small town where we lived, until the last owner sold it to an out-of-town family, who then sold it to us, the most recent family to own it. The relatives of the previous owners still lived in town with the Blake family, and it was they who provided the initial historical details that sparked this story. The remaining Blakes lived in another old farmhouse just a mile down the road from ours. One day, Mrs. Blake came over to our house and told my mom about a family reunion she and her relatives were planning, and she asked permission for her family to stop by our place to take a group photo right outside the front facade. My mom agreed, as long as no one stepped foot inside our house. She didn't see any issue with using the exterior as a backdrop for the photo, though she thought it was an odd request, which she later recounted to me as they arranged the plans. While they discussed it, my mom asked a few questions about the land and the house, and I was very young at the time, about 10 years old, and I remember sitting in our living room, listening to their conversation unfold just one room away. Mrs. Blake told my mom that the house had originally been an inn, and a horse-drawn carriage would carry people up the hill to the inn for an overnight stay in the old rural town. She didn't mention that there was a sick room, a room in the house used to care for any guest who fell ill, as well as to tend to sick or wounded soldiers during wartime. Mrs. Blake explained that when they were children growing up in that house, they sometimes heard voices or thought they saw something in that room of the house, but she didn't go into details. She and my mom chatted for a few hours, exchanging stories about the house, and my mom mentioned that there had been some spooky occurrences lately, though she didn't believe in ghosts anyway. After the discussion wrapped up, things went on as normal in our house. I, however, was completely terrified by all of it, and that's when my lifelong fear of living in this house began. About a month later, my mom had the day off work and decided to take my twin sister and me to the public library to borrow a few summer reading books for school. My sister and I browsed the children's section, while my mom headed to the town's historical archives. When we found her, my sister and I started searching for her around the library. We spotted her sitting at a small table in the back with 2 or 3 books in front of her. "What are you reading?" I asked. "This is the town's history." She showed me the cover, and I confirmed the title exactly. I remember seeing a picture of the old town church. It turned out it had once been located about 3 miles south of its current spot. This book documented photos of the church being moved from one location to another many years after it was built. I recall seeing a photo in another book of a list of signatures that my mom was poring over. It might have been a census record from the town at the time or land ownership documents, but either way, it meant nothing to me. My mom was looking at the name of one of the original owners of the house. Over the years, all I remember is the woman's first name and maiden name, along with her husband's first name. Then my mom showed me an old photo of the house before it was built, with a horse-drawn carriage along the dirt road and a stable beside it. I remember noticing how small the house looked. Our house had an addition built many years later during a renovation, but the part of the house in the photo still looked identical from the outside. Eventually, we left the library and headed home. I'm not sure if my mom found any other information from those books or if she went back to the library alone to dig deeper, but about a year later was when the ghostly incidents really started. By then, there were increasingly frequent spooky occurrences, nothing really reportable, just the usual creepy feelings and lights turning on and off by themselves. That weekend, my mom had relatives visiting, my 2 closest cousins and their great-grandmother, my own great-grandma. Before we moved to this farmhouse, we lived next door to her, and I saw my cousins very regularly, so reuniting with them after a few years apart was a joyful occasion for the whole family. Now, it's important to note that my great-grandma didn't speak much English. She was an immigrant to America from Greece and had never learned much during her time here. She only picked up the words necessary for daily life, so it was nearly impossible to communicate with her without my mom translating. While she was staying with us, we put her up in the living room, which had once been my older sister's room. She'd moved out for college. The other cousins slept in Abigail's room with her. That night, the next morning when I woke up, I joined my cousins downstairs and we had breakfast together. 15 minutes later, Great-grandma joined us and started speaking Greek to my mom. The two talked for a bit until my mom turned to my sister Abigail and asked, "Abigail, did you go into Great-grandma's room last night?" "No, why?" Abigail replied, "Because she says a woman came into her room last night wearing a long nightgown and a cap." Great-grandma spoke to my mom again, and my mom translated for us. She says a woman stood at the door of her room and called Abigail's name. Did anyone go into her room? Everyone looked around confused. My mom said to Great-grandma in English, no one was wearing a nightgown. She continued the conversation in Greek, and the matter was dropped. That fall, my parents went for a walk across our fields one early morning while my siblings and I were still asleep. Our house came with about 20 acres of open farmland that we'd played on as kids, but my parents decided to stray from the usual open fields and venture into the woods surrounding them, an area I'd never explored. When they returned a few hours later, I remember sitting with my mom in the kitchen while she stirred a pot of soup for our lunch. I asked her where they'd been all morning, and she explained they'd walked out to the fields, and it took so long because they'd explored the woods. Your dad said he'd explored one day and had something to show me, so we walked across the fields this morning and found 2 gravestones. I was immediately horrified. They were overturned, so we righted them to read them. Their names were James and Abigail Hall. I recognized the names from a few years earlier when we'd read them in the library books, and so did my mom. They were one of the original owners of this house, she said. That evening, my mom pulled out the phone book and looked up the Blake's number. The 2 women talked on the phone for a while my siblings and I watched TV. After hanging up, my parents talked in the kitchen. I wandered in while they were chatting to grab a snack and overheard her telling him, they think that because we call Abigail so often, calling Abigail's name across the house, it's awakened the spirits. That's why I've started seeing things more lately. We believe the woman who came into the room the night Great-grandma visited was one of the women who worked at or maybe even owned the inn before Abigail. Maybe Abigail's mother or relative. She was calling Abigail in the middle of the night to help someone who was sick. Mrs. Blake said her family members had heard things like that before and witnessed people coming and going from that room in the middle of the night to check on those inside. Great-grandma knew nothing about this backstory. None of my siblings could have relayed this to her because she doesn't speak good English and wouldn't understand. Plus, it would be impossible to know all the pieces of information that came together over the years. Later on, I'm not sure how to explain these events scientifically, and my mom to this day insists she's never seen a ghost in this house. She rarely talks about the sightings we've had while living here, preferring not to mention the incidents at all, even though she's experienced them. She chooses not to believe in ghosts or spirits, which some might say is why they never seem to visit her. I don't know. I won't try to make any assumptions here. All I know is that this haunting is one of many alleged hauntings that have occurred in that room. Just a few weeks ago, while my son was playing in the living room, I was lounging in the bedroom with the door open so I could keep an eye on him. He suddenly ran over to me and said, "Mommy, I'm scared." "What are you scared of?" I asked. "Because there's a monster." It said, "Come here." This shocked me, not just because of the monster accusation, but because he said it so clearly. My son still lisps and makes up words when he can't find the right one. This was striking and creepy at the same time. I asked him where it was. He pointed to the curtain in the dead corner where we store stuff across the living room. He'd had his back to that corner while playing, but I could see it from the bedroom. I saw nothing but the usual half shadow, then asked what it was doing, and he said sitting. 2 nights after this incident, he had nightmares. One minute he was asleep, the next he was rigid as a board and screaming. In the middle of the second one, I yelled into the darkness of the room, "Get out." I just had the urge to do it. As I approached the area, I felt a chill. We weren't running the air conditioning. There are no windows in that area or nearby. We live in a warm place. Everywhere else in the house was warm, except that specific spot. Afterward, I asked some friends to be honest with me about whether they'd felt anything in our house when they visited. This was a few months after that visit. Each of them separately told me they felt a presence, especially in that corner. I asked if we'd brought it with us when we moved or if it was already there. Both said it seemed like it had always been there, as if it was comfortable wandering even with us around. What the hell is really going on? I placed a bowl of salt and lit a scented candle in that area. I also put a cactus there on a friend's suggestion. I'm a skeptic, but with my son involved, I try anything. It seems to have worked. My logical, rational mind is trying to find a scientific explanation for the cold spot, but my son, a wonderful kid that he is, isn't a storyteller and has never lied. There's simply no motive for his sudden fear of anything like that, and it hasn't happened since. I wonder if this is something temporary or if it's always been there like my friends say. Just that one day, it had enough energy to manifest. What do you think? I recently bought a house where the previous owner shot himself. I only know this because the selling family was very upfront about it, and because part of the hardwood floor was missing in what was likely the spot where the police or a crime scene cleanup company had removed it. I got the house at a steal, and at the time I didn't believe in any kind of afterlife, so the fact that someone had died there didn't faze me. To me, it was just a house. I replaced the hardwood floor in the master bedroom and also paid a separate disaster cleanup company to thoroughly sanitize the bedroom because I'm a bit OCD and a total germaphobe. I moved in and loved the house, no issues with the property so far, but I'm now 100% convinced that this house is haunted. I didn't believe in the supernatural until these bizarre things kept happening over and over, and I could no longer explain them logically. Things like feeling someone sit on my bed while I'm reading in bed or trying to sleep. It startles me every time. I can see the imprint of someone sitting there when no one's around. Hearing a woman crying in the master bedroom, but I could never pinpoint exactly where it was coming from until I stepped into the bathroom and it stopped. The house is pretty isolated, about half a mile from the nearest neighbor. Hearing knocks and things falling around the house, then discovering nothing has fallen or is on the floor, like heavy stuff, for example. The other day, it sounded like someone dropped a box of dishes. Smelling women's perfume when I get home from work, this happens especially frequently in the first 10 to 20 minutes after arriving home, and I live alone. I don't have a girlfriend or wife, and no woman has even been to my new house, not even my sister. I just feel like someone's watching me sometimes, like when I'm on the computer or watching TV, I get the sense that someone's staring at me from the hallway. I saw what I think was a ghost last weekend. I was lying in bed with a hallway light and bedroom light on, and I saw a dark shadow glide past my bedroom doors so quickly that I couldn't make out what it was. It was just a tall black shadow about my height, and it scared the hell out of me. I thought someone had broken in and was rushing down the hallway, only to see nothing there. The house was locked tight and the alarm system was armed. There's no explanation for it. I don't do drugs or drink. I've never hallucinated in my life, and I don't have any mental health issues. Finally, my keychain got thrown or knocked off the hook where I hang it every day securely. These things happen daily, mostly from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. I notice the frequency ramps up at least that much. How do I make all this stop? It's causing me so much stress. I'm considering selling the house. I can't even sleep well anymore because I'm constantly anticipating something else happening, or I'm afraid I'll see someone. That's my biggest fear. What I'm about to share is about two spirits I encountered. I'm a sensitive. I see spirits without even trying to seek them out. I hadn't seen my ex-husband in a very long time, and I felt relieved about that. However, I have mixed feelings about his supernatural abilities and the two followers he used to mention. My ex-husband sees supernatural things. He has the gift but chooses not to use it. Many times, I suggested he try helping the spirits that were attempting to communicate with him. His response was always the same. If I acknowledge that I can see and hear them, there will be more and more. He could see the spirits of the dead, angels, and negative energies. I argued with him time and again that if there's a better place or an afterlife, which both of us believe in because of our abilities, then we needed to help the lost souls get there. Would any of us be redeemed if we left behind those who need love, help, and forgiveness the most? It was like talking to a brick wall. The sound is absorbed by a spiritually porous surface. None of my efforts seemed to make a dent with him. He continued to block them out. Occasionally, when he had a particularly emotional encounter, he would share it with me. For example, he told me that most people have two guardian spirits by their side at all times, but he said I always had two spirits plus an archangel. He said I had a mission that required extra strength and protection, but he refused to elaborate. Oh, come on. My husband had two guardian guide spirits. He could see them when he chose to look. One day, shortly after I met up with him, he told me that two spirits had come to his house. He said they were following him and he was afraid of them. He felt they wanted to harm him, like most of us would. I brushed off his worry and changed the subject, but then they came. My property is a place I protect with a salt line and a prayer before moving in. I found that sprinkling sea salt around the perimeter and using a personal prayer was a way to make myself feel like no negative energy could cross my property or enter my home. I felt it was a sweet custom, so I did it. It aligns with many cultures from my family's background. I felt that my intention, more than the salt or the prayer, would make my family feel a little safer. One night, after we attended a family party in the suburbs, we came home. As we pulled into the driveway, my attention was drawn far across my lawn. My property is surrounded by a hedge fence and a 4-foot chain link fence. I could see two figures pacing back and forth along the side of my original salt line. One was a sailor in a white uniform, about 6 feet tall, with a shaved head and black hair. The other was a Hispanic man, maybe 5'10", with wavy black hair combed back. He was wearing Levi's jeans, white tennis shoes, a white t-shirt, and a large black-white-gray striped Pendleton hat. He had dark eyes and a longer mustache. In that moment, my husband whispered, "Do you see them? They're coming to get me. They're coming to get me." I said, "I've got this." They haven't crossed the line yet. Telepathically, I told him to leave. I told him to go away. A lot poured out of my mind. This house is protected. You're not allowed in, etc., etc. And they left. I looked at my husband and whispered, "You have to explain, and you have to let them go. You're holding them here." After we settled into the quiet house, we sat down. I asked him who they were. "They're after me," he said. "No," I replied, "you're holding that pair." "Why?" Now, I'm not a witness to these events and don't know what these men's real-life names were. I'm not even sure about the story I was told or how true it is. However, I had visions of some events. My husband witnessed a drowning when he was 8 years old. He watched an adult man fall off the boat they were drifting on, and the man drowned. The adults on the boat laughed and didn't help their friend. They were all drunk, thought their friend was joking underwater, and drove away. Then the adults left the lake and went home. My husband kept telling them their friend fell off the boat, and they told him to shut up. My husband thought it was his fault. The man was found a few days later. Is this true? I don't know. He doesn't even remember the lake or the location. He was told to forget. The guilt my husband felt had bound that spirit to him. The sailor was the spirit of a man who bonded with my husband in boot camp. That spirit was friends with a drowning man, and both followed my husband. I told him he had to let them go. He wouldn't listen. They could be seen pacing the perimeter of my property occasionally, so I tried talking to them. I prayed for them. I asked them to leave, and I asked for help to detach them from my husband, because he was drowning in self-pity and denial and preferred feeling persecuted rather than trying to communicate. Finally, one day I stopped seeing them after hearing a voice in the driveway say, "Thank you, goodbye." Something like that. That day, I drove my husband to work. On the way home, I nearly lost control. I was in the fast lane in the median, and about a mile ahead, there were two men standing there. I switched lanes to avoid an accident. What are they doing there? As they got closer, I could see one in a white Navy uniform, the other with a Pendleton hat and thick wavy black hair. They waved at me as I passed. They kept waving and smiling. Then they vanished, and I never saw them again. I pulled off the highway and went into a fast food place to splash water on my face, used the bathroom, and calm myself. Then I went home. The strange things I saw. I don't know if the prayers worked. I don't know if my nagging wore them out, but I believe they crossed over, and I think they were saying goodbye to me from that highway median. I've always been fascinated by supernatural experiences. I've always tried to connect with my great-grandfather who passed away, and I've received responses in some form. These events are real, and in a way, I'm grateful for them. A few years ago, a classmate I called Jess died in a fatal accident. She transferred schools, and we didn't see each other much after that. I remember being absolutely shocked when I heard the news. When someone your age dies, it hits you that. Well, it might have prompted me to turn on the bedroom TV to calm my nerves, and it shut off. It was an old TV, so I figured it was on its way out. Not fancy, but fine for the bedroom. I turned it back on, got into bed, and turned around only for it to shut off again. My boyfriend at the time, now my husband, is a total skeptic, but he must have noticed and asked, The TV turned off again? I replied, yeah, and turned it on once more, only for it to shut off immediately. I let it go because it was an old set. I remember her funeral day vividly. It was snowing. I looked up and said sarcastically, thanks for the snow, with a laugh. The biggest gust of wind came blowing through and nearly knocked me and another friend off our feet. We both laughed, figuring Jess was messing with us. The night before my birthday the year before, Jess had texted me at exactly 12:01 a.m., the first birthday wish. This year she was gone, and without that message, I felt so sad. A friend texted, "You won't believe this, she got mail." She'd received a few memorial cards, one addressed to me that Jess's mom had sent to my friend to pass along, and it arrived right on my birthday. I felt so overjoyed. A few months later, I was really stressed about Jess's death. One evening, my grandma gave me a picture frame. Oddly enough, the memorial card fit perfectly, so I placed it on the living room shelf, smiled at her, and headed to the kitchen. While making food, I was waiting for my husband to get home from work. I always lock the door with a key inside. My dog started barking as usual when my husband approaches the door. I heard the front door slam shut like normal because it doesn't latch unless you slam it. I yelled, "How was your day?" and got no response, so I figured he was hiding to scare me, something he does sometimes. I called out again, still no answer. I had to go looking for him. The key was dangling in the door locked. I looked out the window, no car yet, and immediately thought it was Jess. Maybe she was thanking me for not forgetting her. The doorbell rang a few times with no one there. The house at the time had a good view, so if kids were pranking, I could have easily seen them running away since the sidewalk was visible from afar. Eventually, I dreamed about Jess. In the dream, I knew she'd passed and said to her, "I thought you were dead." She replied, "I'm okay. Tell everyone I'm okay." All the weird incidents stopped after that dream. I went through a terrible bout of anxiety and depression, and I believe she was my saving grace. I wanted to share this story to honor Jess. My oldest brother and I are 15 years apart, and he has 2 kids with his girlfriend, so throughout my childhood, I often stayed over with him occasionally. My niece was about 17 when this happened, and my nephew was 16 when he mentioned the birds in the cage in a room. Background info. When you enter this apartment, you walk into the kitchen. If you make a loop, you'll end up in the living room. If you continue straight through the entryway ahead, you'll enter my brother's and his girlfriend's room. To the side of their room is my niece's and nephew's room, on the right after stepping in. My brother's bed is right on the left after entering his room. My niece's and nephew's room has these window wells that aren't like regular windows. They're set high on the wall and rectangular. You have to sit on the bed to crank them open, and they only open halfway at most. One late night, the house was pitch black, everyone was asleep, and I was about to drift off, or so I thought, when I heard a huge bang like someone had just thrown a bowling ball onto the apartment roof, shaking the whole place. I was half asleep, so I figured maybe I was dreaming, like so many times before when I'd been jolted awake by loud noises. It's not uncommon for me. No one else in the house seemed bothered by it, so I just calmed myself and tried to go back to sleep. It was around 1:30 a.m. at that point. The next part isn't from my personal experience. It happened around 2:30 or 3 a.m., and it was witnessed by my brother along with my niece and nephew. I wasn't awake yet. I must have been out cold at that time. Chris, my brother, was tossing and turning. He was drifting between sleep and wakefulness. You know how your eyes adjust to the dark, and you can make out a bit? Chris's eyes had fully adjusted to the darkness, and he'd been lying in it since 11 p.m. that night because he was having trouble sleeping. He was on his back looking up at the ceiling. Suddenly, everything went pitch black, darker than normal, completely void, and he started hearing laughter. He realized he couldn't move his arms or legs. He couldn't sit up, couldn't yell for help. His eyes were still open, and he was hearing this deep, dark, malevolent laughter. The birds in my niece's room started going berserk, flapping around wildly. Brittany, my niece, said she woke up because of the birds, but she said she heard the laughter and was too scared to get out of bed. They said the laughter seemed to go on forever. The whole time, it sounded like it was right above his head and like something was pressing down on him, holding him there. When the laughter stopped, he still couldn't move. After a few seconds, he felt like he was slapped across the face, a full slap from his hairline down to his chin. Right after that, the darkness lifted and he could move again. That's when I woke up. Chris jumped out of bed, screaming like a madman that someone was in the house. Right then, my nephew Brad was witnessing a large black mass hovering in his room, floating up from the foot of the bed and out through the window in the upper wall. They jumped up and turned on the lights to see if he could spot it, but it was gone by then. When I was jolted awake by Chris's yelling, I noticed blood dripping down his face. I told him to calm down and go look in the mirror. After he'd checked the whole house and made sure no one was there, he went into the bathroom and wiped his face. He had 6 deep gashes, 3 on his forehead in the exact same pattern, 3 on his chin. They were perfectly aligned, like something with 3 claws had swiped down his face. To this day, he still has the scars. The cuts were that deep. Needless to say, we were all baffled. And when I talked to Brad the next day, he hadn't even told his dad what he told me, that something flew out the window right after Chris started screaming. It was all a very bizarre experience. I don't know if the loud noise I heard at the beginning was related, but it was an odd coincidence. What do you think this was? Was it a demon that flew out the window? I still have no idea what it could have been. Brittany said she heard the laughter, but my nephew didn't. It was all so strange, and any feedback is welcome. To start, I want you to understand that I'm a gay man, and most of the people involved in the LGBT community that I mentioned. I'm saying this not to wave a human rights campaign flag in your face, but to emphasize just how terrifying these experiences were for us. For me, growing up gay in South Carolina was incredibly tough, to put it mildly. Even when I came out at 13 in the early 2000s, it wasn't easy. I endured neglect, abuse, and betrayal that I pray no one else has to go through. But as the cliche goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Most of the people around me at the time were like me. We were all hardened and could fend for ourselves as a collective. We were even tougher than that. So it's not like we were a bunch of sissies running scared from shadows or nighttime noises. It takes something truly insane to scare us. With all that said, the story is about a house on Reservation Road. It's on 55 acres of undeveloped wooded land in the Catawba Indian Reservation in York County, South Carolina, about a 30-minute drive south of Charlotte, North Carolina. You know, the Carolinas are some of the oldest territories in the U.S., and that comes with a ton of legends, myths, and of course, ghost stories. But who would have thought you'd become part of them? I met Marion and Kellen through a mutual friend in 2006, when I was in my early 20s. I've always felt comfortable befriending lesbian couples because we often share common interests, and they'll protect you like a pair of fierce black bears if needed. That was long before they took me under their wing, and before long, we were spending a lot of time together. Kellen was a few years older than Marion and me, so even though there were always friends gathering at their house, she'd go to bed before everyone else. That gave Marion and me plenty of time to play Mario Kart and swap childhood stories, basically bonding. I've been a photographer for a few years, and when Marion showed interest, I encouraged her fully. I'm not entirely sure how we ended up in the backyard or on a hunt, but we did, and that's what started it all. Let me roll up my sleeves and briefly describe the house so we can get to the creepy part. The house was a simple one-story rectangle. The front faced the road, and the back opened into the woods. When you stepped through the front door, you were immediately in the living room, which opened to the left a few steps. To the right, you had a hallway leading to all 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. A few steps down the hallway entryway, and you'd find yourself facing an open space. The kitchen to the left, French doors straight ahead leading to the backyard, and the dining room to the right. As I said, I'm not sure what prompted the orb hunting on digital film, but I vividly remember both of us standing in the backyard after Kellen had gone to sleep. Marion had trigger finger speed on the camera, meaning she could snap clearer shots faster and in bursts than any photographer I'd ever met. It made her perfect for capturing candid moments. After a while with nothing, she started sweetly coaxing them in that voice you use for kids or pets. "Come on out," she'd call. "Let me take your picture. I know you're out there. Come out so we can see you." Then the camera would click away furiously for a few minutes. She'd lower it, pull up the library, and we'd scroll through the shots. Most were just pitch black tree lines, faintly lit by the floodlights that barely illuminated anything at a distance from the back of the house. Some had dust motes that excited us for a moment before we realized what they were. Then there they were, a few energy orbs. Sweet. This became our new obsession, spending time with a camera outside at night all over the yard, calling out to any lost souls to join us and heading inside to digest the digital film. And some shots looked like a snowstorm of orbs in varying sizes and brightnesses. But what we started noticing over time was that as we began calling them out to join us, more orbs would start filling the screen, and something would shift in the air around us. I feel like I was standing in the middle of a crowd at a big music or sports event instead of an empty backyard with one friend. Sometimes the temperature would drop noticeably. It seems obvious now, but back then I didn't know what we were doing. We were stirring something up. But we soon learned that our new friends were about to become very, very familiar. Now, before we started this foolish hunt, there were a few other odd things about the house. Marion had a spirit attached to her for years before she moved there. While she and some friends used a Ouija board as a game, when she told me about it shortly after we met, I thought she was nuts. She'd survived admirably after enduring severe trauma through her teens, and I rationalized her ghost friend as her coping mechanism. She wasn't hurting anyone, so why not? At first, I was a total skeptic about all of it. I liked the idea of communicating with the other side, but I thought ghosts were for storybooks, Hollywood movies, and Halloween. I soon learned that wasn't an accurate view of the world around me. She explained that through the Ouija, they discovered his name was HP and that he died at age 8. This little guy quickly turned me into a believer, and over time, I grew fond of him. Looking back, I know he protected us from the worst things coming from the woods. He was initially blamed for what was happening, but that didn't last. I also want to point out one important feature of the house. The hallway leading to the bedrooms was pretty standard. There were 2 doors on each side leading to 3 of the 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. At the end of the hallway, straight through the entryway, was the door to the back bedroom. No one ever wanted to go in there. It had lots of windows and was probably the brightest room in the whole house, but it always felt cold, dark, and heavy, oppressive. I only have one way to describe it, and it might not make sense, but it felt like it smelled rotten visually, like your eyes could sense something disgusting and horrible, but invisible, something acrid. And in the months that followed, the activity in the house ramped up. All the typical phenomena you hear in every horror story, but there's something about being in it when it happens. Heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway when no one was home and no one was there. Lights flicking on and off for no electrical reason. Items going missing and turning up in the most unexpected places, or simply not at all. It started creating tension in the house. We tried our best to find explanations for everything, but there were times we just couldn't come up with a logical or scientific one. It drove Kellen nuts. Marion and I were super excited about it. We thought it was cool. Kellen didn't believe us even when something happened to her. She never admitted to being bothered by anything, insisting there was a logical explanation for it all, even if she couldn't find it. We'd sit in the living room many nights, and Marion would ask anyone there to let us know they were present. The temperature in a room would drop immediately, goosebumps everywhere, then a loud, clear knock. Knock, knock, knock from the hallway. She'd get up to check, and no one was there. She'd walk down the hallway to the master bedroom, and Kellen was fast asleep in bed. She said she felt like someone was walking behind her, step for step, on the way back through the pitch-black hallway to the living room. We did it a few more times and got a few more responses from knocks, each time from a different wall at the front of the house. The build-up created a feeling in the house. No one really felt alone. It got to the point where something weird happened every day. Our most frequent visitors all had their own experiences. First-time visitors or partygoers saw, heard, and felt things. Some never came back. Sometimes our invisible friends would spook or scare people so badly that we'd never see them again. They just didn't return. Of course, Marion and I encouraged it every chance we got. At the time, we thought it was fun. Meanwhile, Kellen kept denying it. She started accusing us of pranking people and stirring up all of it. She accused us of making stuff up, exaggerating, and feeding into each other. It was early October when things really escalated. My birthday is October 7th, and I wanted a chill event for the party. Bonfires are my jam, so the plan was good food, a few close friends, and a roaring fire paradise. We had fires all the time. 55 acres of creepy free wood. Yes, please. It was late, everyone had gone, and Kellen was passed out drunk from the party that had eventually moved inside. Marion and I got up to douse the dying fire. We headed down a yard, and about halfway to the fire pit, I stopped and turned my back to the wind to light a cigarette. That takes about 10 seconds if you're bad at it. I turned back, and Marion was at the fire. My heart stopped in my chest. I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. She wasn't alone at the fire. There was a man there, a tall, bronze-skinned man with long black hair. But his face is what still haunts me at night. His eyes were black with no whites, but his mouth, that's what seared into my mind forever. Red as blood all over his mouth and down his chin, like he'd just bitten into a live animal and devoured what he could. There was malice on his face, and every hair on my body stood up. I've read people describe going into fight or flight mode, almost like they recall a switch flipping on and they go into survival or escape instinct. I didn't feel that. The flight urge was overwhelming with me. Next thing I knew, I was sitting on the couch shivering. I couldn't get warm enough. Too cold, too cold. My guts were frozen. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't right. Before I could even start processing it mentally, Marion stormed into the house pissed that I ditched her without a word. What kind of friend is that? That night she veered into the living room, already starting to chew me out, and saw my face. I hadn't felt the color drain from it, but she rushed over asking what was wrong. She said I was ashen, like I died. Without hesitation, I told her what happened, and since she saw my face and looked into my eyes, she knew I couldn't fake a reaction like that, so she never doubted me. It left me deeply unsettled. No one had seen anything up to that point. Doors opening, a glass sliding a few inches across the table, peripheral movement, and absolutely orbs every day. No full-bodied apparition, especially not one so vivid and powerful. He wasn't translucent, smoky, shadowy, or in my head. I couldn't have imagined an image like that on my own. He was terrifying. His face was a gateway to hell with an expression of passionate hatred. This completely shattered my worldview up to that point. I'd never experienced anything close to that level of fear, and I'd lived through some pretty hairy situations that scared me. It spooked Marion too, because she'd been right there and hadn't seen or heard anyone even though he was a few feet from her. Around that time, people started seeing the woodcutter. What gives me chills about this guy is that he was reported by people who didn't know each other. We had a wide social circle. We were the house for artists and actors. We knew everyone, and then some, and these folks hadn't even met. This was before we started warning new people when they came over. We weren't talking about what was happening to anyone. This guy was 7 feet tall, burly, solid, a giant of a man, as you'd expect. He always carried a cute little axe. We believed them, because why would someone make that up? They always saw him either in or right on the edge of the woods, and they were always terrified afterward. Until finally a house regular saw him for the first time. She was sitting in the living room when she looked up and saw him staring back through one of the windows at the front of the house. Clear view in broad daylight through the window. It freaked her out, and she was probably the most unflappable one of all of us. My favorite part is that he was peering in the front windows, those small ones that are over 7 feet off the ground from the outside. Plus, there's thick brush along that side of the house, so no one could have put anything on the ground and climbed up to look in without us hearing, especially since the window was open at the time. That's when she told us she'd actually seen him once before out there, but kept quiet. This friend was actually living behind the house at the time. She was a total hippie, just a wonderful person. She bought a legit teepee tent from someone and pitched it at the edge of the woods behind the yard with a wood-burning stove and everything. Yeah, well, that didn't last. It was Catawba land, and she'd gone out there to experience humble living back to basics, but not because of insomnia. Every night she'd wake up to something big and heavy moving around the teepee. She thought it was an animal at first, but never saw tracks, no footprints in the dirt, nothing. She'd lie there frozen in fear while it paced in a very predatory way. Eventually, she was forced to pack up the teepee and move into a spare bedroom we had. All of us had lived in bad neighborhoods at some point in life, so locking and deadbolting the doors at night before bed was habit for all of us. Kellen got a system shock one morning a few weeks after my birthday. She got up, walked down a hallway, and when she got to the end, She looked up to see the front door clearly unlocked and wide open. To her left was worse. To the right, the back door was in the same state. She felt a chill down her spine as she went to shut the back door, realizing the side door next to the kitchen was open too. No one ever used that door. There was usually a pile of laundry stacked in front of it. She was stunned. She checked with Marianne when she woke from her dead sleep just to make sure all entry points were locked before she went to bed. And why would she have reason to touch the side door? Not long after everyone went to bed and I was alone in the living room playing Mario Kart, I heard the kitchen cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen. At first, I didn't pay attention because the two cats would go in and out of the under cabinets all the time. I figured they were playing, and it kept going open, close, slam. I nearly jumped out of my skin from the cabinet slamming. I felt a cold stone run down the back of my neck. How does a cat slam a door like that? It didn't make sense to me. I set the controller down to go see what they were doing when I realized they were curled up sleeping on the couch over there, twitching in their dreams, dead asleep. I shuddered. It gave me full-body chills. I got up and walked into the kitchen. I knew the door was still opening and closing. I took 6 or 7 steps to round the corner, flipped on the light. Nothing. Everything as it should be. Not a thing out of place. I walked through the room feeling like someone was standing right outside the door staring at me. I could feel their eyes burning a hole through me. The cabinet was empty. No one there. Tense and heading back to the living room to force myself to sleep. Things were getting real, as they say. People were touched when alone. The bathroom was the worst for this. It never failed to shatter your peace. Everyone was on edge. The stress from the constant barrage of inexplicable events was causing issues from Marion and Kellen's relationship, as well as everyone's friendships. Tempers were flaring. We were now hearing disembodied voices occasionally on top of everything else. We tried and failed countless times to debunk the phenomena, only to end up feeling paranoid and uneasy. Marion suffered the worst, including when she was deathly ill and bedridden. Kellen was at work and everyone was out of the house. She was fast asleep in bed when she was yanked awake by a woman pacing up and down the hallway crying. Crying isn't right. She described it as the utterly devastating wailing of a loving mother who just witnessed her beloved child shot dead right in front of her. It was heartbreaking. She assumed something awful had happened and got up to see who was sobbing hysterically and why. The moment she lifted her body off the bed, the crying stopped. It didn't fade. It vanished. The silence echoed, oppressive. She struggled out of bed and opened the bedroom door. No one. She walked down the hallway, opening each door as she went. No one home, no electronics on, windows closed, no one in the yard. She felt dread rising as she checked the whole house, only to find no one home except herself and all doors locked from the inside. She went back to the bedroom feeling anxious, exhausted. She lay back down in bed and the wailing started right up again, full volume, full intensity as if it had never stopped. Every time she lifted herself off the bed, it would cease. All she wanted was sleep. She felt awful, and this made it worse. She tried calling out to soothe comfort, but to no avail. Eventually, she finally fell asleep. At this point, I don't need to tell you that no one felt safe anymore. No one was comfortable even with multiple people in the house. There was no escaping it. You never felt at peace, never felt alone. You always felt watched. It was raw. There was only strength in large numbers. Our parties were legendary around here because we threw them often. Only then could we let loose. Having so many people in and around the house certainly didn't do anything to stop the supernatural activity, but there was so much going on that it got drowned out pretty well. We discuss it openly with everyone now. They were clearly warned they were partying in a legit haunted house. There was no shortage of people with their own stories to tell or witnessing an event. Often, someone would slip up and call bullshit or declare very strongly that they were atheists or whatever and didn't believe in our nonsense. Every time someone did that, they were almost immediately targeted. It was always a round of laughs at their expense. A few of them were so spooked they never came back. A few would never speak to us again. Well, you were warned. I almost insisted everyone sign a liability waiver so I don't apologize for them getting nipped in the ass. The worst of these was Taylor, poor thing. Her girlfriend Jessie had been hanging out with us, and we all became friends. That's custom with new folks. Kellen invited them over for dinner and to chill for a bit. I was gathering with them, and it was time to head to the house for dinner. Jessie was telling Taylor about the creepy stuff going on, and I gave my usual warning while she tried to shush me. I remember clearly telling her in no uncertain terms that she shouldn't dismiss anything she hasn't seen. She mocked me like I was a crazy off my meds. Suit yourself, girl. We arrived and settled in while Kellen cooked. I went back and forth entertaining guests and snacking in the kitchen too. I remember clearly seeing a stack of plates on the counter by the sink placed too close to the edge for my comfort, so I walked over to them and pushed them flush against the wall, deciding to wash them right after everyone finished eating. In the living room, the conversation had turned to the activity in the house. Marion and Jessie were swapping stories, and Taylor wasn't buying any of it. I heard her clear as a bell from my spot in the kitchen saying it was all bullshit, and she didn't believe any of us because it wasn't real. I swear I could hear my eyes rolling in my head as Kellen snorted and chuckled. Oh damn, I said it's just a matter of time. Sure enough, as Kellen started plating the food, she called the girls in the other room to come get dinner. I was standing with my back to the French doors, sink to my right. Kellen was at the stove when Jessie and Taylor rounded the corner followed by Marion. I looked as they turned into the kitchen doorway and stopped dead in their tracks. Jessie's mouth dropped open, and Taylor's eyes went wide as dinner plates. The color drained from their faces, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up before I could move an inch. The room was shredded. It took a minute to piece it all together afterward. As the girls turned into the kitchen, they saw one of the upper cabinets swinging open on its own. I was across the room, and Kellen had her back to it. That's why they stopped. I hadn't noticed the door behind me yet. It had been open for 5 minutes before I took out the trash and knew for sure I'd closed and locked it when I came back in habit. At the same time, 2 doors slammed with such force that it shook the whole house, and the stack of plates slid off the counter, smashed into the wall by the stove, and shattered all over the floor. And no skeptics, the plates didn't just slide off the counter from the doors slamming. I wish physics could explain this, but I saw them hit the wall with force even Kellen couldn't explain. This, we soon found out, was her breaking point, so Kellen contacted a paranormal investigation team. She told them a bit about what was going on and asked for help. None of us knew what to do. It was out of control, and what was happening wasn't okay at all. At this point in my life, I learned to cleanse and protect homes and living spaces better than anyone I knew. I had a whole bookshelf in my room with all my metaphysical tools. If it happened today, no problem, but at the time we were all green. This seemed like the only answer. They came, it was a group of them, and I remember about how many, 6 or 7 maybe. After they arrived, we all stood at the back right on the edge of the tree line. We were telling them more details about some of our encounters, and the sun was setting fast. They didn't really act like they believed us about the level or frequency of the activity. They admitted they weren't too interested in the house. One of the women, I'll call her Debbie, had recently injured her leg and wouldn't risk going into the woods with the others, so she'd be the only one going into the house with us. She'd go through all our orb files while the others investigated the property. This was a bit disappointing. I felt like they didn't believe us and wouldn't help no matter how many crazy things happened in the woods. Our concern was what was now disrupting daily life in the building. Debbie was explaining what made them good at what they did. They were all natural skeptics. She said she balanced the group more by being a total skeptic in every situation, with no hard evidence convincing her. My heart sank. I was even more disappointed as she spoke. I started thinking we wouldn't convince them this was real, and thus they wouldn't help us fix this mess. But I'd foolishly forgotten one very important fact. No sooner had she just explained her role in the group than she felt a tug on her hair. Her hand flew up and she whipped her head around. She admitted thinking her ponytail had caught on a low branch, but when she turned back, there was no branch and no one behind her. She was stunned for a moment. One of the investigators swore he'd seen her ponytail lift up right before she turned. Right then. This brought a grin to my face and lifted my heart. We told you. They react when someone claims not to believe, I said, and we all laughed. The tension was broken now. She came inside with us while the others did their thing in the woods. Ironically, and something that happened in that house while she was with us, it was like having a bunch of naughty kids determined to behave their best with ghost hunters around. Turns out it didn't matter. She was glued to those photos, sometimes twisting the laptop this way and that to see better. She copied some files to a separate folder, and when she was done, It was those exact ones she brought to our attention. She pointed out countless energy orbs that seemed to contain a face in each one. I mean, seriously, very clear faces once you looked closely. There was one in particular that stood out to her. Clearly a man's face, 2 eyes and a nose, mouth sometimes open like he was speaking, and most intriguingly, a distinctive handlebar mustache. The face appeared identically in a good number of the shots. The awesome part was that this guy showed up in photos from multiple positions taken at different times on different days by different cameras operated by different people. Oh God, this chilled my blood but excited me at the same time. She praised us for documenting the events and was thrilled to have the chance to go through the photos. I think it really made her happy to find something we hadn't and to hand us this piece. Her colleagues finished outside, and it was time for them to go. They hadn't experienced as much as I'd hoped, but they'd seen enough to make them believe our situation. Time passed, and the girls eventually broke up. Marion moved out, and in a way, my friendship with Kellen didn't really survive the breakup, and I stopped spending time at the house. Though we worked through some issues and I went out there a bit, nothing was as bad as before. This was part of the reason her new girlfriend wanted a place of their own. No ghosts from Kellen's previous relationship or actual ghosts. I went out to see them on the last day. Everything was pretty much cleared out of the house. I went to help grab the last things to take to their new place. It was a fun occasion. I was glad to see Kellen doing well with moving on. When we got to the new place, Kellen was almost too excited to tell me something. She was practically bursting. While they were packing up, she decided to chat with some neighbors down the street. She saw them outside and approached. Somehow the conversation turned to the previous owners, the ones before Kellen's ownership. This still gives me chills to this day. The neighbors told her about the old man who basically lived in that house forever. Turns out he actually died in the house. Yep, and even better, he died in the back bedroom itself, the room no one could stand. Now the final piece is where my wheels fell off. This guy was known all over the reservation for his handlebar mustache. I know how hokey that sounds, but it seriously gave me goosebumps writing it out. Handlebar mustache for real. The one thing the investigators noticed in those energy orbs, that's goosebumps to this day, over 10 years later. For you skeptics out there who don't believe, remember that until this happened, I was just like you. You better hope and pray you don't end up like us. It's easy to call something unreal when you're reading it or hearing a YouTube narrator. It's a whole different beast when you're living it day in and day out. It started on the first day we moved into the new house we built ourselves. The place still had a thin layer of white dust coating almost everything. I was heading up the stairs and noticed a strange handprint in the dust along the wooden railing by the balcony. I looked down and saw a pair of tiny baby footprints in the dust, facing the opposite direction, as if the baby had been clinging to the stair railing to make them. We didn't have any infants in the house, and even if we did, there's no way a baby could have done that. I didn't think much of it. I snapped a photo to show my parents. This was before recent iPhones removed that feature on the camera. I want to show my parents the pic, and the photo on my phone had been deleted. Again, I didn't think much of it. After a while, and after my mom had cleaned most of the house, I thought about those footprints again. I went to check, but my mom had already dusted the railing. A few days later, I was packing stuff in my room. My sister's room was right next door, and our house walls were pretty thin. I heard her start belting out songs loudly. I was exhausted and just wanted to pack in peace. I went to her room and found the door locked. I banged hard to tell her to shut up. She went quiet for a bit, but then started singing again. Annoyed, I stormed downstairs where my parents were and started tattling on her, trying to convince them to go upstairs and make her stop. My mom paused for a second, mouth agape, and said, "Your sister went to summer camp 2 hours ago." Both my parents stared at me in shock, and a sick feeling rose in my stomach. I went back upstairs and saw my sister's door wide open. I packed the rest of the day with my own door shut tight and locked. Not long after that, supernatural stuff started happening almost weekly. We had the typical things: doors slamming shut, lights turning on and off, the front door flying open, doors locking from the inside, items falling and going missing, footsteps heard, curtains moving. For a while, it was just stuff like that, but then some scarier things began. One night, I just turned off the lights to sleep and felt my comforter sliding off the bed. I lazily pulled it back over me, but suddenly the whole thing was yanked clean off the bed and onto the floor. I hid under the sheets for the rest of the night. My sister and I were watching a movie in the basement and eating pizza. After the movie, I was cleaning up the pizza mess. I went to pick up an empty paper plate and realized I couldn't lift it, like something was holding it down, even though I could see nothing on the plate. I jumped back and yelled for my sister. She picked it up easily. Another terrifying instance was when we'd just gotten home from a trip out of town. It was pretty dark, and all the lights in the house were off. We parked in the garage, and I was the first one out of the car. The garage door leads to a hallway that goes to the kitchen on the right and the living room on the left, so when you step in, the first thing you see is a white wall. I opened the door and flipped on the light, and I was greeted by what I can only describe as a hazy, smoky black shadow. It seemed to sense me and bolted to the right. My first instinct was to scream, then cry, then slam the door shut and run back to the garage immediately. We eventually called the cops because my dad thought there was a burglar in the house. I saw something that night, and it still baffles me to this day. After that incident and a few others, we decided to talk to my pastor about it. He came over, and we blessed the house, anointing oil and crosses on every door frame, whispering protective prayers. I felt like I was in a movie. However, the stuff still happened after the blessing, maybe not as intensely. My mom was in the kitchen and felt someone moving around her. She said sorry and stepped aside, only to realize no one was there. My mom saw what she described as something colorful in the bathroom mirror reflection one morning. My grandma visited, and she swore she saw a body falling from the balcony. I wasn't there when it happened, so I don't know much about it. Now in the dorms. In the beginning, I said I think something is following me. A lot you might say it was just my house that was haunted, but once I went to college, the stuff only happened at home when I was there, so naturally whatever was followed me to the dorm. One night, maybe around 3 a.m., my two roommates and I woke up to some dramatic, eerie music. After searching for a bit, we discovered the music was coming from my computer, which had been locked and shut down before. Opening an Xfinity tab and playing some horror movie I don't remember. When I quickly shut down the computer to go back to sleep, we also had stuff going missing from the dorm and never seeing it again. I also heard constant tapping when my roommate wasn't there. The weirdest thing I experienced was one night waking up from deep sleep with an overwhelming urge to go to the wall because I was certain the picture hanging there was about to fall. The moment I put my hand under the picture, it fell right into my hands. I was shocked. How did I know the picture was about to fall? I also had really bad sleep paralysis in that dorm. Now at the house, I nannied it right after moving out of the dorm. Whatever it was followed me there. The kids I watched all summer. One time I heard a deep growl from somewhere in the house. I couldn't pinpoint the source of the noise. The little girl and I were home alone one afternoon, and suddenly I heard a deep male laugh from a distant room. I asked her if she heard it, and she said no. Not 3 minutes later, I heard what sounded like a crowd of disembodied voices from the end of the hallway. At that point, I grabbed the girl's hand and went outside to call the cops. I was shaken to my core, and the girl started crying. I was responsible for her, and I was terrified there was a burglar or something in the house. There were no signs of a break-in, but those voices still haunt me to this day. Now in my new apartment, nothing bad yet. My computer fell off the desk. No way it could have, it wasn't even on the edge, and my roommate swears that when she walked into my room, she got goosebumps. Recently, I went back home for a few nights to visit my parents, and I just turned off the lights and lay down for about 5 minutes when my sliding door creaked open slowly. I lay still, and then I heard a woman whisper, "Is he asleep yet?" In my head, I thought it was just my mom checking on me, and didn't think much of it. The next morning, I realized my mom was out of town, and everyone else in the house was asleep at the time. This happened 2 weeks ago. So that's it, no conclusion. It seems like something is following me from place to place. I'm not scared and don't feel threatened by whatever spirit or entity it is. All I want are some possible theories and maybe even some answers.